Hello everyone, a very good evening, and on behalf of GNG, I welcome you all to the fourth day of our event, Break the Bias 2022. I hope you've all been blessed by the last 3 days. I hope you have all been following the past 3 days, and I'm so glad we could all join for yet another day on the auspicious occasion of Women's Day that we're going to celebrate on March 8th. So before I am your host for today. My name is Blessy David, and before we start the session, let us start with a prayer. My gracious Lord, loving Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the time you've given us today. Thank you so much for all the great things you've done the past 3 days, for all the things we've been learning. Lord, at this very outset, as we start the meeting today, Lord, I ask you to be with us. Lord, I ask you to give your Holy Spirit to each and every one of us, that we understand that everything that we're going to learn. And I pray that you be all through the meeting, right from the beginning. You be with the host and everyone who's joining the meeting, that there be no technical issues, no disturbance or anything. I commit this time into the loving hands. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen. Before we head into the session, I ask Sister Monica to lead us into a time of worship.
Praise the Lord, Andarki. My name is Monica, and coming to the Bible verse, Isaiah 49th chapter, 15th, 16th verses ఒక్కసారి చదువుకొని లెట్స్ గో ఇన్ టు ద వర్షిప్. స్త్రీ తన గర్భమును పుట్టిన బిడ్డను కరుణింపకుండా తన చంటి పిల్లను మరచునా, వారైనా మరచుదురు కానీ నేను నిన్ను మరువను అని చెప్పి గాడ్ ఇస్ ప్రామిసింగ్. అండ్ ఆల్సో, చూడుము, నా అరచేతుల మీదనే నిన్ను చెక్కుకొని ఉన్నాను అని చెప్పి హీ ఈస్ ప్రామిసింగ్ టు అస్. సో దాని మీద నేను సాంగ్ పాడాలి అని చెప్పి like the Spirit is leading. It's all worship him, like thank you Lord, నీ అరచేతుల మీద మమ్మల్ని చెక్కుకొని ఉన్నందుకు థ్యాంక్ యూ సో మచ్ లార్డ్. థ్యాంక్ యూ లార్డ్. డస్ట్ అయిన మమ్మల్ని నీ అరచేతుల మీద చెక్కుకొని ఉన్నావు. యూ కెన్ సీ us every time, always Lord, by seeing or watching your hand. Thank you Jesus. Thank you Lord. శిల్పి చేతిలో శీలను నేను అనుక్షణము నన్ను చెక్కుము. శిల్పి చేతిలో శీలను నేను అనుక్షణము నన్ను చెక్కుము. అందరం చెప్తాం, నీ చేతితో, నీ చేతితో నన్ను పట్టుకో, నీ ఆత్మతో నన్ను నడుపు. మమ్మల్ని అందరినీ నడపండి దేవా. నీ చేతితో నన్ను పట్టుకో, నీ ఆత్మతో నన్ను నడుపు. నీ చేతిలో శీలను నేను అనుక్షణము నన్ను చెక్కుము. నీ చేతిలో శీలను నేను అనుక్షణము నన్ను చెక్కుము. ఈ భూమిలో రాజు నీవే, నా హృదిలో కాంతి నీవే. ఈ భూమిలో రాజు నీవే, నా హృదిలో, మన హృదయాల్లో కాంతి ఆయన. కాంతి నీవే కుమ్మరించుము. ఎస్ లార్డ్, నీదు ఆత్మను pour out your spirit Lord. జీవితాంతము నీ సేవ చేతులు. పేతురు వాళ్ళందరి మీద ఆత్మ కుమ్మరించబడిన తర్వాత ఎంత అమేజింగ్గా సేవ చేశారు. అలా ఆయన ఆత్మ మనందరి మీద కుమ్మరించబడును గాక. కుమ్మరించుము నీదు ఆత్మను మా మీద జీవితాంతము. నీ సేవ చేతుము. చెప్దామందరం. జీవితాంతము నీ సేవ చేతును. నీ చేతితో నన్ను పట్టుకో, నీ ఆత్మతో నన్ను నడుపు. లెట్స్ ఆల్ సింగ్. నీ చేతితో, మన చేతులు ఆయనకి ఇద్దాం. నన్ను పట్టుకో, నీ ఆత్మతో నన్ను నడుపు. శిల్పి చేతిలో, శిల్పి చేతిలో శిలను నేను. నీ చేతిలో శిలం ప్రభువా. అనుక్షణము నన్ను చెక్కుము. వన్ లాస్ట్ టైం. నీ చేతిలో శిలను నేను. అనుక్షణము నన్ను చెక్కుము. అనుక్షణము మమ్మును చెక్కుము. We give you thanks, Lord. Praise the Lord.
Thank you so much, Sister Monica, for a great time of worship. So once again, నేను మిమ్మల్ని అందరినీ 4th day of our event Break the Bias కి GNG తరపున అందరిని ఇన్వైట్ చేస్తున్నాను. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm glad we all could know about a lot of things all these 3 days. So I'm sure ఇవాళ కూడా మీరు చాలా eager గా వెయిట్ చేస్తూ ఉండొచ్చు. సో ఇవాళ మన టాపిక్ ఈజ్ విమెన్ ట్రాఫికింగ్, అండ్ మనతో దీని మీద మాట్లాడడానికి we have our guest Ruth Thomas. So meeting start చేసే ముందు I would like to say a few words about our guest today. So Ms. Ruth Thomas is presently the co-founder of SRT Law Associates, and she's engaged in multi-law practice with special focus on women, children, and vulnerable groups. So she worked also as a legal consultant for an international organization on human trafficking for about 8.5 years. And she started her career working on sex trafficking in Mumbai, and then her work experience includes rescues and trials on ITPA matters, POSCO matters, and rape cases. She then spent about 4 years tackling child labor and labor trafficking cases in Karnataka, where she worked closely on bail, trial, and appeal matters. అంతేకాదు ఇవాళ మన గెస్ట్ ఉన్న సిస్టర్ రూత్ థామస్, తను చాలా పోలీస్ ఆఫీసర్స్ ని, ఎన్జిఓ మెంబర్స్ ని, జ్యుడిషియల్ ఆఫీసర్స్, లా స్టూడెంట్స్ చాలా మందిని ట్రైన్ చేశారు అక్రాస్ ద కంట్రీ. She has trained them on ITPA, POSCO, labor trafficking, child protection laws. వీటన్నిటి మీద she's trained so many different people belonging to different domains. Also, she was a member of the task force that drafted the comprehensive standard operating procedure to combat human trafficking in Karnataka. Also, Sister Ruth Thomas has written many research papers. She also co-authored a research paper which got features in Daksha's journal. So that's all for now, Sister Gurinchi. So we are so glad to have such a great personality amidst us, Ivala. So I'm so elated, and I welcome you to this session, sister. Over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be part of this crowd and to be sharing my experiences on human trafficking. As you all know, my name is Ruth. I've been working in this area for about 10 years now. So I've started my career in 2011, wherein I specifically work to rescue children from commercial sexual exploitation. And obviously, that was in Mumbai. So we have done rescues in red light areas, we have done rescues in massage parlors, we have done rescues at home residents and things like that. And then from there, I moved on to another project, and that project was basically to rescue families, not just children, but families as well, from labor trafficking or forced labor or the modern day slavery. And that project was both in Tamil Nadu as well as in Karnataka. So we did a lot of rescues. And then we realized that we need more of advocacy from within the state departments as well as the central department. So I moved on to the next area, wherein I worked with both the governments to ensure that policies are in place, there's enough budgets allocated, these policies are implemented well. So we have more orders and government notifications so that the local authorities would implement the laws. So with that, I also then moved on to doing big cases as well as just giving policy advocacy advice to many of the NGOs. So right now I'm independent, and I still am very passionate about human trafficking. I've been giving different kinds of trainings on the said subject to many universities and colleges and institutions, because I realized that this is a subject which many of us think it's very complex, but we do not understand the grievousness of it and that it is happening just around us. So it's very important for us to realize that as well, to be very, very mindful at the same time, not oblivious to what's happening around us. And these things happen just around us. It's just that we do not see it the way. So through awareness sessions, I feel like, more communities and more institutions and individuals like many of us can come forward and think of solutions. Most of the time, it's not just the stakeholders and, the NGOs who are doing this kind of work. There are also citizens who do their part. It may be just providing them shelter, it may be just coming to court for testimonies, which I'll be coming in detail through my session. So you will be suddenly thinking that, oh, should we all become eyewitnesses? But it's not like that. I'll be explaining it in detail on how things work. So what we need to understand from the beginning is that human trafficking is one of the biggest illegal industries in the world. So it's the third most largest profitable illegal industry in the world. That means after drug smuggling and arms trafficking, obviously, human trafficking is regarded as one of the most illegal industries. There are large profits coming out of it, and most of it is done through illegal means and illegal, ways. And so it's very hard to even track back the profits that's coming through. And we've seen that this has been happening for years together. This is not something that just suddenly popped up, right? It has been there from time immemorial. If you look into our history books or just track back history, whether from countries together or just from within India, we've seen slavery and slave-like systems for decades together, right? And then we've also seen that in armed conflicts and internal conflicts, obviously the citizens there or the people there who are exiles, are also usually sold off as slaves or put into slave-like trades, and women are often usually used as sex slaves. And these things have been going on for years together. But very recently, that is in the past decade, we've also seen human rights getting prioritization, human rights getting promoted, not just internationally, but also within countries. But at the same time, we also have seen a new technology that has emerged, which is the online technology and platforms. And what we have seen is especially women and children who are, usually the part of the vulnerable group, they get easily preyed, not just in the physical world, but also in the online platforms. We've seen that exploiters are very smart enough to actually target these groups, and most of the time what happens is they get heavily exploited. We might have heard about pornography and online online commercial sexual exploitation happening. Many of the women are, whether it's girl children or just adult women, are getting easily preyed in, and the sad reality is that they get exploited for a longer period of time because it's more difficult to trace and rescue them. And obviously, with the pandemic, we have again seen a huge surge of cases. So another important thing is what we are seeing right now: the unrest around the world, the geopolitical factors also keenly affect people who are at the vulnerable side, and it's easy for the traffickers to eye them and exploit them. Uh, and this has also been happening throughout. So that's when we always say that human trafficking just doesn't happen to people who are poor, who have been poor through ages. Yes, that is one, poverty is one of the reasons. But apart from that, when there's a sudden shake of the geopolitical situation in one of the countries, then whether you belong to whichever class, there's high chances that you can just flee from that country. And most of the time when you flee, many of the countries are not ready to accept you as well, because you are treated more like an outsider. And what happens is, this is the time when traffickers, they realize that these people need help, and they utilize different ways to actually exploit them. It just doesn't happen like this way. It happens through constant nurturing and talking and building their trust through wrongful means. So that's how exploitation happens in areas where there's internal conflicts or constant armed conflicts, or even refugees who have been moving from one country to other country to get asylum. Exploitation is pretty prevalent in these groups, and obviously the most affected is women and children. And it's pervaded all societies. It's there in all continents, it's there all over, it's even there within communities. Everybody gets affected in trafficking. So today I'll be mostly dealing with the legal aspects, the procedural aspects as well, mainly because we have 2 sessions of trafficking. So I don't want to touch upon many of the major definitions of trafficking. I thought my dear friend and a great inspiration for me, Chris Light, who is also the founder of Red Rope Movement, who are doing some massive, amazing work within their organization, will be talking about it as well. So I'll be mostly touching base on the legal aspects, the procedural aspects, a little bit on the definition, because obviously the definition also would have some kind of legal annotation and understandings that needs to be given. And finally, on how we can help in reducing trafficking. And that means, what's our role? How can we do? What is the minimum that we can do? Things like that. So I'll just go back and share my screen. It might take a few minutes, but I hope that won't be a huge issue. Sorry for this inconvenience, but I'm just going to just share my screen, so that we will be able to understand it better. Some of us will be able to understand with the statistics and how we can divide certain definitions and things like that. So yeah, I'm just going to do that. Thank you so much. I hope you can see. So we'll move on to what is trafficking, and I think that will be better. So as I've already spoken, human trafficking is nothing but smuggling of human beings, basically from one place to another for the purposes of exploitation. And I'll get into details with the section 370. Just to give you an understanding how grim the reality is, human trafficking is happening at an alarming level There are millions of people who are exposed to exploitation, and some of the statistics related to women and children are just down below. If you see, 71% of all trafficking victims worldwide are women and children. Okay, and that includes girls, which is more. Obviously, 71%, which is a large amount because majority of the population uh, are into exploitation, and that is basically women and girls. 3 out of 4 trafficked women and girls are sexually exploited. Again, this means that most of the women and girls who are trafficked are also sexually exploited. So what that means also is that many a times, they must be, trafficked for labor, forced labor. They are sent into industries where they are not paid wages, where they are physically abused, and where they are, not allowed to go out. They can't see their family. They are in a dire situation. But the additional, element is that many of these people, many of these women and children are also sexually exploited. So it may not be trafficking for sexual exploitation, but they may also be doing this, or they may also be sent for sexual exploitation. That's the saddest and heartbreaking reality of many of these cases, because they don't have a way to express themselves or to give an opinion. They are too fearful that obviously there are people around who would then take them for advantage. Their dignity is completely crushed, and they even think, why should I exist? That's a sort of exploitation that they go through. Internationally, we have seen that this subject is given very much of importance, and especially we have two main conventions that has come about. We have what is called the Palermo Protocol, which is specifically to deal with human trafficking, especially running within women and children. That is the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. And also we have the Forced Labor Convention, and this is basically a convention or a covenant where countries have come together, prioritized the importance of forced labor and how they can tackle within their own countries. So many of the countries around the world have ratified both these conventions, which means they have signed off saying that they will ensure that this issue is tackled within their own countries. So India also is a signatory on trafficking conventions, and we've had many conventions that we have signed. And so what we need to understand is, even though we have made those sign, or we call it ratification of convention, it is important to bring it locally. So we need local laws to ensure that those conventions or those commitments that we have made outside is preserved and kept. And the way we do it is bring in laws wherein local authorities will also implement them. So right now, under the Indian laws, we have the Constitution, which we all know is the backbone of our laws. And the Constitution of India under Article 23 has clearly prohibited all kinds of trafficking, and beggary and forced labor is specifically spoken about, which says that all kinds of trafficking, which includes beggary and forced labor, are prohibited. And then we have other laws as well, like we have different laws to cater to different kinds of exploitation. We have the Indian Penal Code, which is the general law, any kind of harm, any kind of sexual harm, all of those are defined under the Indian Penal Code. A penal offense is attached to it, which means if you've committed a crime under the penal law, there's obviously a penalty that is attached. It could be punishment, and it could be a punishment of fines, or it could be a punishment of rigorous or simple imprisonment, which means you're going to jail. And then we have ITPA, which is specifically catered to protect women from all kinds of commercial sexual exploitation. We have Juvenile Justice Act, again, to deal with children who are in need of care and protection. We have POCSO, which is a fairly new act, but an evergreen act because it gets amended. It is an act that basically protects children from all kinds of sexual abuses and so forth. We have different, multiple layers of laws, but we did not have anything specific as such on trafficking. It was only in 2013, after the sad event of Nirbhaya's case, the committee that was formulated then, which is also known as the Justice Verma Committee, decided to get into the criminal laws and make amendments. So they decided to bring in certain amendments, and one of the major amendments that came about was Section 370, which also clearly stated that it is a trafficking offense, and which I'll be coming into detail. But this is where we clearly realize that Section 370 should be called the trafficking section, right? And now we have the trafficking bill that has come up very recently, maybe 3 to 3 years back, especially by one of the NGOs. But this is still under discussion. We still haven't got a full nod from both the houses of the upper parliament, and so we are waiting. Hopefully we will also have a full-fledged procedural law on trafficking as well. So trafficking is clearly defined under 370 IPC. Trafficking basically means just smuggling of people for exploitation. If you see this, you might get it's really scared, what's happening. This looks like a huge definition. So I'm going to divide this definition under 370, and it becomes very much easier to understand. There's act, there's means, and there's a purpose. If you see, there's an act. That act looks very much like legal, that is recruitment or transportation, transfer. Harboring is like placing a person in a home or keeping them for some time. And receiving people looks like very much legal. But then look at the means. The means are all illegal. If you see, threat is there, force is there, coercion is there, abduction, fraud, abuse of power, deception, and inducement. So the traffickers utilize an act, any kind of act, and then they club it with an illegal means, and then they use it for the purpose of exploitation. And exploitation can range from sexual, it can include forced labor, slavery, practices similar to slavery, or forced removal of organs. Now, let me give you an example. How does this work? It works in this way. In many of our cases, what we usually see is we have a family somewhere in a rural village in Odisha. They suddenly had floods. They lost all their agriculture. Suddenly, there's a huge expense that they have to cover. They do not know what to do, and then suddenly there is this, a neighbor or a neighbor's friend who listens to them and understands that they're going through such situations, and he feels so bad for them, and he clearly says that, hey, why don't you just try coming to Karnataka or Tamil Nadu? Things are much better there. You can at least work as a daily wage laborer and you are getting paid much more than Odisha. Why don't you try it? I know some of the folks. And so the neighbor then, obviously the neighbor speaks Odia. The neighbor has been staying there for a while. And so obviously the neighbor's friend is someone that they can always trust. And so due to this dire situation, they decide to migrate from Odia. And obviously this friend then shows them someone from Odia itself who's ready to take them till Karnataka. They are like, nothing to be worried. We will take care of you. Not to be tense. There are so many people like you. And so then this family packs up everything, and they also say that children can study in schools there. It's not so bad like in here. You will get a much better life, and I'll assure you, you will get all that is required, at least for a basic living condition. That is 3 meals a day, kids going to school, family able to get at least daily wages. And then suddenly this person also says, why don't you do something? We will give you an advance of 10,000. And that shows that this company is really good and they will take care of all your expenses. And hearing all of this, the family who is at such a dire situation where they're not able to make even 100 rupees a day suddenly finds hope, right? And so then they decide to move out. And what we see is that we see this family suddenly gets to, the railway station, and they see so many families like them, and they're like, okay, fine, all these people are with us, so there's nothing to be worried about. And then at the railway station, they are like all put into compartments, and obviously nobody is there to check them out, check what's happening. They reach at, some place in Majestic or in Karnataka, which is one of the major hubs of trafficking as well. And there, these families are all taken on into a truck by an agent. Again, most of the families are still hoping things are going to get better, place looks better, and all that. And then what they see is that they reach a brick factory where they are supposed to make, they don't have any shelter. They have to build their own shelters with whatever materials are provided there. And then that day they are just provided 1 day or 2 days meal, and then they are forced to work. And this happens within the outskirts of Bangalore, not away from Bangalore. Nobody is there to figure out what's happening. And these families, they are all speaking in Odia. They have no idea what's happening in Karnataka. Many of them are physically abused when they are asked for their daily wage. And it's very heartening, but this is the truth. The entire family, which can include a father, a mother, two children who have been working in scorching sun, making 1,000 bricks a day, are only given 250 or 200 rupees per week per family. Imagine the plight of these families. 250 rupees per week. And they are beaten up, they are not let out. And obviously, there are local authorities also involved, because if there's checks and balances, these things do not happen. This is the cycle of trafficking. So what we see is, we see recruitment through, the neighbors, agents. We see transportation. They are provided transport. They are put into trains, and then they are taken by trucks. There's all kinds of means used, starting from inducement and then deception, then moving on to abuse of power. Some of them are abducted. And then threats are used for the purposes of exploitation. In this case, which I talked about, it's a forced labor or a bonded labor like situation. And so it's very, very similar to the forced labor that's spoken about in the purpose. In many of the cases, women are, sexually exploited. Many a times, many of the women, are forced into commercial sexual exploitation. And most of the time, it just doesn't happen. Many a times they want to see a better life. They fall in love, and they believe that they are going to get better. And what happens is, they are trafficked from one state, like in Karnataka. They are moved into states like Mumbai, and where they are sexually exploited, and for years together. And this just doesn't happen in one set of society. We have seen middle class families as well falling prey to it. There was a case where we all know that because of constant exploitation, the victim was not able to clearly remember the address during the rescue. And after almost 3 years, we figured out that, she's actually from Karnataka. And then she gave a number after 3 years. And then one of our social workers called, and we realized that she's actually the daughter of an accountant. And then obviously we did repatriation, and we ensured that she is back at her home and she's doing well. But that's how significant it is to understand that exploitation can not just physically damage you, but it mentally tortures and throws you off completely. It's very hard for these individuals to get back. So what we have seen is, there's always three kinds of modes. We always see a source, a transit, and a destination. And most of it is hidden in plain sight. We cannot see anything. There's high chance of missing out. It's difficult to act. It's very difficult because things happen too fast and it takes place too quickly. Now, there are different approaches that's adopted. One of the main approaches that's adopted is prevention methods, ensure that there's clear awareness and economic empowerment happening within different hotspots. Two is to identify cases and rescue them. And rescue is not just enough. If we are doing rescue, we have to couple it up with rehabilitation and reintegration, where social workers do a massive, amazing job of completely transforming a broken individual to an individual who can think about her future. And then finally, prosecution. Prosecution is where the perpetrators are held accountable. We have different lawyers who are looking into these aspects and ensuring that perpetrators are held accountable. Now, some of the key features that we have seen is consent of the victim is immaterial. The punishment can range from 7 to 10 years life, but you're involved in trafficking of a minor that can go from 10 years to life. This is a non-bailable offense. So trafficking is a very serious and a grievous offense under the eyes of law. Now, how do we do this? What is the procedure? Every time there's this question. So one of the main things that we need to understand is that anyone can file a complaint. It's not necessary that, only the local authorities or anybody can file a complaint. And especially when women are involved, you have the toll-free number like 181. And if there are children involved, there is a toll-free number like 1098. So immediately, give anonymous calls to these outlines or these hotlines, and then the complaint is first sent to the local authority or the police, where it is reduced into an FIR. And obviously during this time the rescue takes place. So in most cases what we do is we usually rescue them immediately, and especially if women are involved in commercial sexual exploitation, it is a different ball game because they get moved much faster. In many of our cases what we see is by the time we have reached these children or women must have been moved to another place. There were times when there are like small passages within these brothels or massage parlors, and it's very hard to like figure out, but through constant experience we keep tapping up all the cupboards and all the ceilings, and one would be a false ceiling. And then we'll suddenly open it up and we'll see it's a small air passage where, women and children are put in and they can't even breathe properly. And then slowly they are brought down. They are too terrified to even tell the truth of what's happening. They're just shivering with fear. They do not know who to trust because their trust is completely mishandled by exploiters and traffickers. And suddenly we can't expect a whole group of, strangers asking them to trust again. So what we do is once we have rescued them, we ensure that they are provided counseling, and an FIR is done, but 161 statements, or the statements that needs to be taken from the victim, is given time. So they are given time to just breathe and think about what has happened. Counselors are provided to them. They're provided with basic facilities. If they need medical aid, then that is provided. And once that medical aid and everything is provided, counseling is done, then the statements are taken. Usually there's a lawyer to help the victim as well as a social worker. And then in many of the cases, especially if children or girl children or just children are involved in commercial in sexual exploitation, then there's something wherein the judges also take their statements so as to keep it more clear. And it's always better to do that, because when judges take the statements, they ensure that whatever is required under the law is covered, and which is also known as the 164 statements. And in the meanwhile, obviously at the brothel, you would see that we need there would be money kept by the owners or even the brothel keepers. So the money is collected. Then during the commercial sexual exploitation, we also do something called a transaction to show that this was a brothel. So we usually have different witnesses who would just join a customer who would pretend to be a bogus customer. We call them bogus customer. And there will also be male punch or a male witness, and then we also have a female witness as well. These witnesses can be anyone, and we get a lot of volunteers from different localities, especially even from institutions, volunteer organizations, church organizations, and others who are ready and willing to do such rescues. So most of the time we would have them also be as witnesses. They come with us for the rescue, and obviously they are going to tell the truth of what happened. We can't utilize witnesses within the locality because most of them are traffickers, and obviously the case would go for a toss. So what we do is that we carry our own witnesses, which helps because in the court, when they listen to the story of these new witnesses and the bogus customer, obviously they'll believe the story. And then other evidences are collected, charge sheet is made, and then obviously once the charge sheet is done, then courts would take the case wherein there's trial and judgment. Now, HTUs are there, which is called the Anti-Human Trafficking Unit. It's a specialized unit that works to prevent and protect people from trafficking, and it's there all over, and they are very specialized to do this kind of work. And then obviously, many of the times the victims who are from different states, for example, if the victim is from Bangladesh, especially women survivors, many of them are from Bangladesh and Nepal. And so once they are released and repatriated back to their states, they need not come back. The testimonies are done through video conferencing, and there's obviously victim compensation attached in many of the cases. We specifically as lawyers fight for victim compensation in courts so that they are provided as a sum for as victim compensation. It could be the fines that is imposed on the accused, or it could be a separate amount that is given to the victim. But at the same time, there are a lot of challenges that I also want to speak about. It's interwoven with procedures. If you see, there are too many procedures, and it's very hard to understand what is what. Two, there's lack of coordination between stakeholders. They are involved in their own work, and it's not easy to do such kind. Obviously, corruption is another issue. In many of our cases, there is very less convictions. It's sad, but it's also a reality. For many of the reasons that is attached is one, victims in many of the cases earlier were not ready to come and testify. Two, the judges were not ready to accept what is happening. Three, also because the lawyers and the prosecutors are not specially trained to ensure that all the elements required in the case is followed up. If it's not, to ensure that those elements that's missing is added up and supplemented with additional evidence. So because of all of this, there's very less convictions, but we are hoping through capacity building and trainings in different departments, we are able to reduce this. There's always hostility within witnesses. In some cases, they do not want to come forward and tell the truth. And it's only through counseling. So when you don't have counselors and social workers around this subject, it's very hard to bring back a victim who's already traumatized and who do not want to come back to court and testify. And obviously, there are budgetary constraints like in any other law. And lack of resources and prioritization is also because there's less of budgets. Many of them are overworked. Many of the stakeholders, like the police, they are overworked and they do not want to give special priority in this case. And there's also preconceived notions. This is something that needs to be changed immediately, wherein we realize that especially women, because women are part of a society where they've been constantly been seen as a secondary citizen. They've been always abused, or abuse is seen very normal within homes. Whenever they speak up, not many are ready to listen, and that includes even other women stakeholders as well. So especially, or when it comes to caste atrocity, so when a person from a scheduled caste talks about the fact that she was sexually abused, they would be like, why would anybody abuse you? These are the very undignified questions that gets put forward. Many a times they do not want to believe what the victim needs to state. So that requires a lot of sensitization, a lot of way we see. So that requires a change in the way society itself sees each other, right? So those preconceived notion is a major setback as well. Now, what are the solutions? This is in a very large scale, the large scale I would like to state. One is that there must be substantial investment put into this subject. It's a huge subject. If you see, traffickers are very organized. They know how to bend the law better than all the other response systems put together. So there must be substantial investments to, actually break that cycle. Two, there must be evidence building. We do not have data to show how it's working or not working. And the frontliners who are, there is a huge gap. There's a lot of technical discussions happening. We have great professors and PhD holders talking about the issue, but that is not getting translated to the frontliners like an inspector or a writer. or a BAO. He is sitting in his office and doing his work. So there must be some kind of collaboration. So evidence building is very important. Third, it must be a responsibility on the state. The state must take it as that this is important. And then obviously victim centric approach in these issues. These are welfare legislations. We cannot give the benefit of doubt to the accused in these cases. After doing so many cases, I very well know that most of the victims, at least 99% of the victims, have gone through severe abuse. And so to ensure that their voice is heard before anybody else. Then interlinked coordination. This is where we need communities to come forward. We need private organizations also to come forward and do this. Because if you see many of the victims, survivors, they just need a shelter. Many a times the government shelter homes are so overcrowded that they're not able to get them in or provide them amenities. Most of the time there are shelter homes, but there's no amenities. So we need more of private partner citizen partnership, and obviously the states should encourage it. Most of the time the states are like, why are they interested? So that should also change. State should be more interested in encouraging people from outside to help. Again, another way is have consistent accountability within the whole chain of authorities, and evaluate constantly. So have data scale up, ensure that we have monitoring and evaluation experts to look into these aspects, and then evaluate and see how we can move forward. Finally, what are the things that we can do, like as individuals? It's this is a huge subject, but how are we going to help each other? One is to be aware and create awareness sessions around this. Just talk about it within your communities. Be vigilant. It must be happening at the railway station or at a bus point, or just in your own residential apartments. So just be aware about the surroundings, and be aware and be ready to help. Do away with social norms, and don't, when especially about caste segregation, racism, do not stand and say, I don't have much to say about it. No, these are evils that is affecting the entire society. Instead, build empathy, build human dignity. And the way we can build human dignity is provide empathy, ensure that all of us are at the end of the day just living beings on earth who need support from each other. Volunteer or intern, like especially if you can, just help out the NGOs, and just so as to see what are the grassroots level problems. Many of you can be witnesses. Most of the times, especially in commercial sexual exploitation rescues, what we want independent witnesses who can stand in court and say that this is what happened. And it's not that you are just sent into for a rescue. There'll be an entire team which will include that NGO, who would prepare you on how the rescue is. Even after the rescue, we'll provide you with sufficient materials, and we will prepare you in a way to speak the truth at the court. And then be active bystanders against violence. That's something that you can do daily. Violence can happen to women in many ways, and one way is human trafficking. There's domestic violence, there's sexual violence, and every day I'm sure there are many women who are suffering. Is just for us to give that helping hand. Peer-to-peer education for students, anti-trafficking clubs, again for students, if they can start up within their own organizations or within their youth groups, to see how you can help. And then obviously create digital awareness within your own family members and friends. If you are the community there would be a good group of people who would have good understanding of how the digital world works. Help other communities as well, so that they are not preyed easily. And obviously there are other toll-free numbers that you can use, 1098, 181. These are some of the numbers that is given by the state officially. So I believe community participation is the key. So ensure that we are able to provide more support to communities around us. So it's just about being vigilant, giving empathy, doing away with social norms, and just standing and just being ready to help each other. And I'm sure many of these things through our small acts can make in a big difference. We have seen in many cases wherein, people have stood as panchas and witnesses, and those cases, even though we did not have the victim who were just far away, who couldn't give testimonies, through the evidence of video conferencing from the victim and also from the witnesses, the court believed the story, and we've got convictions. Especially in Mumbai, we have a record high of convictions happening in commercial sexual exploitation. There was a time when many of them didn't believe that victims could be abused for sex trade, but now we have a system in place. We have courts who are ready to convict the perpetrator who has committed such crimes. So I would like to state that it's important for each one of us to do our part, and that's when we can bring in a change. With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Ruth Thomas. It was a great session. I personally really enjoyed it. I've even made some notes. I'm actually a student of from the background of arts, and I've had few courses on women's studies, and I would like to say I find it really intriguing. So thank you so much for a great session, and thank you so much for joining us today for the question and answer session. Before we start, I would like to tell the audience, meeku questions emunna gani, if you have any questions, kinda live chat box lo you can drop in the questions. I welcome you to this session. Thank you so much for joining. Let us begin. So the first question is, can you suggest any protective measures for girls and women when they're traveling alone, so they would be vigilant, so as to keep themselves safe, so they can identify if a person is trying to off-track them into trafficking?
Yeah, sure. So that's an important question too, especially while we are on the buses and all. It's important to be very vigilant. One thing that you can do is be extremely vigilant and not to take anything lightly, because it's all moments and seconds actually, when things happen. So it's important for each one of us to be as vigilant as possible. The second one is, there are a lot of toll-free numbers. Use 100. Okay, and there's 181 for women in distress. Usually they take up. Now again, when you are traveling, especially, you could be out of range places, right, and out of coverage areas. So the best thing is shout as much, and run if you can. So these are the things you should also be able to weigh your situations and see how difficult the situation is. Always, I would say, though we would love to see a society where we are kept safe, and we would want to, but it's always important to understand that we are also in the midst of crowds where there are a lot of criminal offenders, and many of them are still going scot-free. That's also an issue, right? So once they have done, it's not reported, then the next time they get more and more this courage to do it, and so ensure that you raise it up right away so that it doesn't get stopped, and you don't take it, even if it's a small incident of sexual harassment. Don't stop it. You need to turn back and ask what's going on. Yeah, I know many of us are part of this and we have been victims, but if we need to stop it, we have to stop it right there. And these are the small minimum things that we can do, but at the same time, the way the situation and see. And I would say, don't if that this is an area that is that looks a little bit out of crowd and there are no people around, ensure that you have people, you have a company with you who you could trust. That's also important. So these are some of the things, but apart from that, stand up. If you know of friends who have gone through any kind of harassment situation, stand up, whether it's within your family or outside your family. It's not that these things are not happening within our families. All of us know we are all witnesses to domestic violence is happening right at our family situations, maybe our aunts or uncles. And so stand up for those survivors so they know that we are with them. And then obviously there's a criminal discourse that you can take. That's your decision. And there are different ways available. There are lawyers like us who are very well aware of the laws, who can, if it's a family issue, obviously we can take it up, or human trafficking. There are commissions for women. That's another thing that all of us should know. There are both commissions for women and children specifically, and it's not as complicated. So you can just go to the commission for women if you have any issues. And obviously the police station, which could be slightly hard. There are many NGOs who are working in different areas. Just have an idea about these NGOs as well, especially that helps at the same time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think many women these days are not aware that there are special commissions, and thank you so much for putting that out. Now, moving on to the next question. As we've already established the fact that human trafficking and about when we consider human trafficking, majority of the victims are women. So, do you think there is a certain category or a certain age group that are considered the most targeted victims?
Yeah, so there is a high demand as well. No, this works between high supply, high demand. And so the reason why there's so much human trafficking is also because there's a huge demand. And based on studies and based on experiences, what we have seen, the study and the demand rises when the age is less. So it's women or children are the main target areas, especially in the online world. It's sadder because the age is diminishing as the days go by. So we have heard of even infants, and we have heard generally they look for children who are between 6 to 15. When it's physical world, it's more between 11 and 12, and those kids are usually abducted or sold. And obviously and then obviously it becomes a pattern for them, and most of the time the traffickers also ensure that there are hormones injected into these kids so that they grow faster. So there are a lot of other offenses that they are committing on the child, but these are the usual ages, and it's kind of shocking and sad, but it's also the grim reality.
Yeah, thank you so much. Moving on to the next question. Um, why aren't the anti-trafficking laws so audible? What do you think what do you think are we lacking here?
That's a very good question. It's a challenge, actually. One reason is that the anti-trafficking law came in very recently. It's only in 2013. So, that there was no prioritization of such a law till 2013. We had to do, combinations of law to prove our cases. There was never. So that's one thing. So it's a fairly new law. We do not have a specific act. There is no specific act as such. We don't have a committee formulated specifically on trafficking. There is, if you've heard about Sunita Krishnan, I'm sure Hyderabad has heard about Sunita Krishnan. She has her NGO, Prajwala. She's been doing some amazing work. So they had filed a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court, and we have the Trafficking of Persons Bill, but it's still in debate within the upper house of the Parliament. So it's still not passed. Because there are also some technical issues of discussions which is still going on. Hopefully once that gets passed, I think there'll be more authorities implemented. The thing is, if you utilize the same set of authorities for these bigger issues, the entire priority get lost, because there's obviously, if you use the same district collector to also take care of human trafficking as well as land acquisitions as well as land reform, it's kind of hard, and I feel like it's too much of a burden on that collector to take up everything. So we need more systems in place. We need more special forces in place who should be recruited specifically to do this kind of work. Otherwise, again, even though we have these laws, implementation will be another utter failure. So hopefully with that law, we should also have a specific budget for a specific system to come in place.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, moving on to the next question. What would be the best way to report if such an activity is noticed?
The fastest way is to utilize your toll-free number. But also the easiest way is to go to the police stations. But many of the times what we have seen is some of the police stations are not very very friendly when it comes to services to be provided to the common person or the common man. And so it gets very entangled between, talks and complications around whether to file or whether, just to leave the case, and there's discussions around that. But again, there's a lot of reformations happening now. I'm not sure about Telangana, but at least in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu or in Maharashtra, from what we have seen, if you go the second time, at least they will file. And usually in sexual harassment cases, at least in Karnataka, we know that there's a specific order. You can't even close the case that fast. So once you've filed a case, you have to, take up the case till it is charge sheeted and it goes to court. So there are certain reformations done here. So I'm thinking it has changed also in Telangana and in Hyderabad. I'm not really sure, but I have seen that Hyderabad, when it comes to human trafficking cases, have been much more responsive than all other states. At least when we had our state seminars, with all the AHTUs sitting in, obviously Hyderabad and Telangana has always been, in front as such, or Andhra Pradesh as such as being very in the forefront in talking and ensuring that human trafficking cases are at least dealt with better than the other state. I'm not saying they are perfect, but at least they are dealt with better than the other states. Like, when you compare to Karnataka or, even Tamil Nadu.
Yes, definitely. The introduction of she teams has helped a lot. And that was very great. So moving on to our next question. You've told us about how the trafficking thing happens internally in the country. So if we consider the situation where people are being illegally trafficked into other nations, let's consider if they are to be traveling by air. So how does this thing happen? I mean, they would be needing visas and everything. They would be checking authorities. So how do people traffic people into other countries without, how do they pass all this?
There
Do
are
you think
different
there
ways.
are other
Sure.
authorities
Yes, yes.
involved?
So there are different facts and circumstances of cases. There are cases where, especially we have seen a huge, inflow of people traveling from Bangladesh to India. And many of them are, actually, people who are fleeing from some kind of religious persecution there, or from and from Nepal also you see a high influx of people. And many of them, are trying to like get a better life. And most of these families, they do not have any of the papers in place, and they just, cross those borders. And if you see, Bangladesh border and West Bengal's borders are quite close by. It's just about, even though we have the BSF and the border security forces, you can actually, illegally migrate into another country without much of pressure. Okay, and the same thing happens with Nepal as well. Because in many of my cases, especially when I was working in Maharashtra, many of the girls were from Bangladesh. And the thing they say, it's very, very easy. Once they have reached from Bangladesh, it's easy for them to move to Bengal, and they also kind of, some of them also even speak Bengali a little bit, and they somehow, are, able to come through. And it is obviously because there are agents involved who would pretend that they are, I am her daughter, or I am her father, and things like that. There are also women involved in trafficking, which many of us wouldn't believe. But most of the time, there's women involved, and they would say, this is my daughter, she's coming with me, and she would have all her papers, but her daughter wouldn't have all the papers. So, this is the way, they will somehow ensure that that kind of, attention is not given. They are kind of organized to do that. Some of them utilize all the way, in as such in Kerala and all that. What we have seen is, they travel from, at least from Kerala to the other countries quite well. They have all their papers in place. But then once they reach there, they are exploited. Their passports are immediately taken away by the trafficker, and their papers. And once their papers are not there, they are not able to prove. And then they are sent to some sheikh's house, and, they are exploited heavily there. So there are different means. Some of them go through legally till they reach this place of destination, and then they lose out. Then their, papers are taken, documents in essence are taken away by the traffickers. Some of them start off from, they even start off targeting people who don't have any of the papers. So they know they'll not be able to travel much, but then the agent gives them hope saying that, hey, I will take care of the papers, don't worry, just come with them. And obviously people don't believe, right? In my first case, that's what happened. In my first case, I was shocked because the girl was just 16 years of age. And when I asked her, she fell in love with a boy and she had nobody. And she thought that he would help her. And he told her, yes, let's, move out from, Bangladesh. And she traveled with him, moved to Bengal. From Bengal, she was moved to, to Mumbai. And then he left her in one of these bars and just went away, and she was exploited for almost 3 years, and it's only after that we were able to rescue her. And then it took a while for her to tell the story, but this is how it happens. There's no one organized way of doing things. They are very smart. They read the individual better than even the response system and the prevention system that we have right now. So that's
Wow.
that thing. Yeah.
That was really a shock.
Yeah.
So moving forward, as a lady lawyer, did you face any challenges while dealing with trafficking cases or any threats per se?
Yes, definitely. Obviously, we all, especially as women, we always have to fight it out everywhere. I'm sure that has been a system. And when you're a women lawyer, it gets harder because the system itself do not want you in. And then you're fighting for another, human trafficking like crime, which is kind of more complicated. But then obviously we have support. It's not that we don't have support. We have support from other, lady councils, the NGOs, counselors. So it's a daily battle, but then we have learned to, wade through it now. We do learn not to drown, but to swim at least, float at least.
Definitely. Yeah. So there's one more question from the audience. Is forced labor a form of trafficking?
Yes, very much. So I was just saying that it's very clearly laid out under Section 370. Forced labor is not defined as such. So anything can come under forced labor. Forced labor is very much, defined under the Constitution as well as under 370, stating that it's a form of human trafficking and the punishment is very severe. Now, the issue is there's a lot of debate on what are the kinds of forced labor. Now, there's a debate on certain things. When we started working on bonded labor situations, many of the judges were not ready to accept that bonded labor is not forced labor. Though again, the act and the purpose of the Bonded Labor Act clearly defined that bonded labor is a form of physical labor and it is coming under forced labor. It's there under their act, but still the judges were not ready. So then we had to go back to the High Court, get interpretation on this. But nowadays, many of the judges have easily understood that bonded labor also comes under forced labor, and these are all forms of trafficking.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, moving forward, so do you think the trafficking has more to do with the class separation or anything? If we consider the class partition, do you think the economically or socially vulnerable people are the major targets on comparative grounds?
True. So socially and economically vulnerable groups would definitely be the priority target for the exploiters. That would be the first priority targets because it's easier to, influence them, abuse them as well as exploit them because of their dire situation. Obviously, class segregation and caste segregation are another big issues. Like most of the, bonded labor situations, commercial sexual exploitation again has varied range, but again there are classes who were like segregated and because of it they were forced into commercial sexual exploitation. But in bonded labor situations, most of the cases that we do, we figured out that based on statistics, we found out that it's at least 90% of the cases have more of people from within the SC and the ST caste who were subjected to exploitation. So it's truth, and it is actually, this is a huge evil that is still existing. We may think it's not existing, but it's existing in every level, and it's sad reality. And it's very sad to see that some of us even believe that doesn't exist anymore. No, we are in a country where we have to accept that caste segregation, class segregations, economic depravity is the reason for all these. It's not the fault of these individuals. Most of these stakeholders also have this issue. The moment they see, they're like, these people are used to telling this kind of lie, they are poor, they don't have any other ways. No, the system made them, system exploited them, and sadly the response system is also not ready to believe them. That is the sad thing where we need a change. There's a constant stigma also attached to them, so they are also scared. They don't want to come out and tell, hey, I'm getting exploited, someone help me. Nobody, no, everybody gives a blind eye to this kind of situation actually.
That is really sad. It's terrible that they don't have anything, even if they come to come for help, that they are not being accepted. I think that's really sad. So moving forward, what kind of support are the rescued women given? Do they are they given therapy? Do they undergo therapy, or is it just till they're rescued and they're left on their own to fend for themselves? Because usually, when we hear about cases as such, we also come across people going back, you know, just because they don't find any other means of fending for themselves. Because all these years they've been into this, and that is the one thing they only know. And we've learned yesterday through a session that the whoever brings them into this basically breaks down their self confidence by telling them you're fit for this, that this is one thing, only one thing you can do to fend for yourself. So uh, so are they just rescued and left on their own, or are they given other kinds of help as well, so they could move forward, so they could get out of the whole situation?
Yes, so this is something that I always advocate, that don't do a rescue without having other plans, because it's not easy for them. Most important thing is rescue have also a setup plan for them, because they are very vulnerable if you rescue them and leave them at their places. So it's important to understand that the laws, there are different laws in place, which helps in rehabilitation, especially children who are between 15 to 18. Those children are also prime targets for all kinds of exploitation. There is a complete system under Juvenile Justice Act on how they must be rehabilitated, and they shouldn't be just sent across to their homes without any kind of analysis, because most of the time there are high chances that these children can get re-trafficked again. So there are NGOs in place. Most of the NGOs who do rescue work would obviously have a rehabilitation department, which would include social workers, counselors, therapists, lawyers to help them out. So it can only be done collaboratively. We have to do it collaboratively. So we obviously, even under the laws, what we do is the women is first placed in before the magistrate. The same thing happens with children. They are placed before the child welfare committee. First, they do an inquiry just to see what are the needs required. And sometimes they do not want to do that. They ask the NGOs to do a needs assessment and see what do these children want, or what does this women want. Some of the women want to go back. They are like, we want to go back home. Some of the children say they want to stay back. Then you will have to figure out how did he study, or he or she studied, what are the skills they already have, what are the improvements they require, which is the best home for them. For such, when you put them in a protective home, is there an educational institution attached to it? And now if there's medical issues, then all the medical issues also looked into, because most of these survivors also suffer from a lot of medical issues, especially commercial sexual exploitation. What we have seen is many of them are already suffering and have contracted HIV, so they need medical treatment. And then some of the women are very malnourished, and children are malnourished, so nourishment is important. So all of that is also taken into consideration, apart from the case that follows. And then counseling is very important, because this is a trauma that we can't even think. Even the smallest harassment that we have faced, we know as women, it has damaged us to a lot of extent. And imagine, these survivors have come through the most difficult ordeals in their life. Their lives were split, and to bring them back to mainstream of society is not easy. So there's a lot of therapy sessions provided. We have something called TFCBT, wherein we provide proper for trauma counseling specialists who would come forward, use different kinds of therapies, which will focus on the trauma so that they are able to heal themselves. And many of the women have come out. Then we have schemes available for them. There are schemes available for compensation if they need some kind of compensation. Even while they go home, there is a clear procedure laid out how they should be sent back home. There are police escorts who are supposed to be there, NGO people who should be there. There must be orders provided. Also, before all of this, we need to make a small analysis with that family. Will the families accept them? Sadly, in many of our cases, we have seen, earlier and all, the survivor wants to get back home. She's so excited, but then the family have stigmatized her and said, we don't want her. We have not heard about her for the past 10 years. Why are you bringing her? And that can shut her down again. She just wanted to get back. So, we have to see all of this. So we need counselors. That's why I say counselors and social workers are, angels who come in disguise, who actually come on earth to provide that change in them, and they do those changes. It's marvelous to see. In many of our cases, we have women who are working right now, children who have finished their 10th and 12th standards, who want to go further in life. Some of them are working back in the organizations where they rescued them. They are working as social workers. So that change is there, but at the same time, there are also challenges. We have seen that apart from all these, some of them don't want to stay back again. They would just leave. They don't want to keep in touch. So there are these challenges also, but we will hold on to those positive and those, lights, the stories that brought light into our hearts.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I think that information was very needed. So thank you. It just brings joy, to know that they are not just left right where they are, and they're given help. Because I think at that point, that is all they could use and they would need. So thank you. So moving forward, as a society, we've advanced quite a lot. We're in the 21st century. A lot is happening. We have the metaverse, everything happening, but we still have things like moral policing happening. So in that light, I would ask you this question. So do you think the most of the trafficked women, if I'm specifying women and girls here, so do you think they are trafficked because of the dresses they wear, because of the way they act? Do you think that has something to do with them being trafficked?
That is the least of the concerns, I think, for traffickers. I don't think it's anything to do with your dressing. It's anything to do with the way you look. That has nothing to do with them, because if you see many of the cases that come across India, it's not about the dressing, and they are not coming from a place where they have all the liberty to wear the dresses that they want. They are from villages where they do not have any income. Most of them are just trying to find a better job, or they fall in love with someone who was wrong, but the entire family also thought it's a good marriage. Why don't we set up a good marriage with another person? And he turns out to be a trafficker. So this not happens in love marriage. This happens in arranged marriages. So it has nothing to do with dressing. And obviously moral policing is not the solution for any issue. Like being a lawyer who has worked on women's rights and also who has been working on a lot of family issues and women's issues, I don't think this is a solution at all, and this should not be a solution. It's actually more like a harassment of an individual's identity. I don't think this will not bring any kind of solution. Instead, we need to be more aware about the issues, be more understanding, be a society or a community who would want to see their daughters, enjoying their freedoms even in the night. Right. But we have reached a society, we are in a society where we need to tell our family members, especially our sisters or our daughters, not to go in the night. And that's sad. And that is not the solution. The solution is to nurture our family members who are male members and female members. Harassment is not done with. You cannot do harassment. This is not something. And break the notions of patriarchy. Patriarchy is again not the solution. These are not solutions. These are some of the guidances that were provided because at that point of time, they thought that's the best solution. Okay, if you don't go in the night, that's your solution because nothing will happen to you. But we are in a society where many of us work in the night. Many of us do, have online classes. And just to be digitally, we need to find solutions in where we can stop such crimes, figure out who has created it, and we have a response system. fight that case. You find an online harassment, or there's online hacking, there are systems in place. We have the NCPCR, we have NCPCR's commission, which clearly says that put any complaint, there is a bot given, just talk to the bot will give you solutions. It's that simple sometimes. So most of the time what happens is we don't want to fight the case. It's easier to say don't go out, don't wear this, don't I and I, as individuals, as a survivor and of violence myself, I know that that was never the case. Most of us got harassed not when we were wearing the clothes like that. We must have been going to work with our dupattas on and still we faced harassment, right? So that's not the solutions at all. And I think as a society, as education institutions, as religious institutions, we should make the commitment to say that we will fight against the crime. Anybody who commits a crime needs to be dealt with the way it has to be dealt with, under the law. Again, under the law. We shouldn't not take law in our hands and start beating up the person. That's not the solution. The solution is there is a law provided, take that recourse and provide protection to that survivor. That is what we need to do. So definitely, I think I'm able to answer that question.
Yeah, you've answered it quite well. Thank you so much. You've put out a lot of information, and thank you. Thank you for that. So now moving forward, we have just a few more questions. I think we could wrap it up. So moving forward, some perpetrators use psychological force such as coercion or manipulation or to force victims into non-consensual sex. This has become more common today, let us even in friends and colleagues, even in a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend. So how do we help people aware of this? How do we help them come out of this? Or I think women usually are are told to see are told that if you're let's consider marital rape. Until very recently, the authorities haven't identified it as something that is horrible. So how do we make people aware of this, and if we come across a person, if a friend of ours is going through such a thing, how do you think we could make them aware of it? How do we help them come out?
See, every person has the right to their bodies, okay, and that is something that we need to understand, that nobody can force any kind of perpetrator behavior on us. That includes sex as well, which we need to understand. See, this is something that we need to talk to, especially to the younger generation. There must be gender education starting right from schools, because people are exploring differently, and there are also the understanding of the age. Sometimes children are not aware of the age and the laws, so we need to talk to them about that. And even for adults, I realize that it's very important to talk about it, to discuss about it. Most of the time we do not want to discuss. I'm so happy and I'm so glad that GNG ministry is talking some of the things that many of us individuals are talking to at a very large ratio. But this is happening right within our churches, right within our communities, but nobody wants to talk about it. So I'm very glad GNG is taking the time, because this is an issue that many individuals are facing, especially the younger generation. And so it's very important to talk about the subject, discuss about it. There's rights, there's a yes or no in all cases, and when there is force, that's a no. You can't say that is okay in a marital relationship. It's just not okay, because you are actually destroying the other person's dignity and the right to express that person, and especially that will create trauma in your relationship as well. So it's very important to talk about it, to discuss about it, to explain about it, that both of us have rights, as and these are fundamental basic rights that's given to us. This cannot be taken away. Now, if something happens, there are laws in place. So if you're in a relationship, any kind of relationship, especially if it's if you're a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or if you need to understand there are laws in place to take and to redress this. Don't go to that extent. Instead, before itself, have discussions. And if there is also, I would say, whoever is the victim, please take it up before the actual authority and file cases. If not, at least file legal notices. Have the lawyers talk into the subjects and get at least a legal notice issued, so that that person knows that this is something that you shouldn't do. right? And in marital cases, I would say there is a Domestic Violence Act. Utilize this act. This act talks about not just sexual abuse, it talks about economic abuse. If you are, separated and not given some economic assets to take care of your own household, that women have the right to raise it up. So economic, abuse, or if it's physical abuse or verbal abuse, sometimes the person is very nice, but they just use all the oral and verbal language that can, totally tarnish the other person, especially the women's spouse. Then you need to bring those act, and that is why we have the Domestic Violence Act. It's fairly new. Again, it was came about in 2005, but we have redressal mechanisms in place, we have laws in place. Don't also for survivors who are facing different situations, don't just keep it to yourself. There are people around who can help you, and once you start a step, definitely there's going to be challenges as well, but it'll bring some kind of response, not just to you, but to a solution to other women as well. Don't leave it there. So I would say there are people around. If you're finding it hard, please contact any of the lawyers or organizations. I'm sure the ministry here also would have know about, would have an idea, would have a list of people who can help out. It's also good to keep a list with each organization, especially who are the counselors within your churches, advocates within your churches, organization who can give a quick help at the time when there's dire need on certain issues. It'll help the members as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting us know of the various institutions that we could go to. I think nowadays even educational institutions are coming up with committees in the institutes itself to be reported to, and I think that's progress. Yeah. So moving forward, what should be the first step that a church could take if it has to take part in this actively? What do you think a church could do?
This is one of the first steps. We started off with a session on the subject itself. It's amazing. This is how we can start. And then second of all is, like, if you want to be part of human trafficking organizations, there are many organizations, I think, around. Partner with them. They'll be happy to have them. See, in many of these protective homes, what we have seen that they do not have some of the basic facilities. You can provide basic facilities. In Maharashtra, when I was working in the Mumbai, side of things, obviously many of the churches were involved in providing Christmas programs for many of these homes. And not just providing them Christmas programs, but providing them with basic things, small gifts for each of these children or each of these women, and they felt very special. So these are small things. And then you can also talk of, there could be governments who are looking out for certain like CSR initiatives. I'm sure many of you would be working in the corporate side. Link with your CSRs and see how you can effectively help these organizations. And the easiest another way to do is just talk to the NGOs who do rescues. They would need witnesses. So if you are ready to be a witness, you just need to be with the team, see whatever that's happening there, and then that will all be noted. And after 1 year, the court will ask you to come to court and testify. You can do that as well. So there are different ways available. And you just need to connect with these organizations. They'll be happy to give ways in which they will have their own requirements. So you can talk to each of these organizations and they will get back.
Absolutely. We as a ministry would very much look forward to doing that. So so moving forward, do you see human trafficking as a hidden epidemic? Why does sex trafficking remain one of the hardest crimes to track down?
Yes, human trafficking is, it's one of the toughest crimes to crack, because it's an organized crime. In Maharashtra and all, when I was working, we could even book it under Maharashtra organized crime. That is equal to an organized crime like drug smuggling and drug trafficking. We could also book human trafficking. The thing is also, because there's a lot of work going around in Maharashtra and Mumbai, most of the judges are also proactive, and there's been a shift in how they see human trafficking cases. In other states like Karnataka, we still don't see that will from the state. They are still, they are trying to make differences, but it's not as evident as when I worked. This is based on my experience also. It's not as evident as when I worked in Mumbai, when it's 4 years or 5 years back. So the thing is, we need that kind of state priority as well. Nowadays, we don't get that priority from all states. Hopefully when that priority comes, they know that we can crack it better. And obviously sex trafficking, this has been an issue for years together. This is not like it started off right now, right? Even old times, even when we had all the earlier the bloodsheds that was there, even at that point of time, women, because they were of the vulnerable group, they get easily targeted, and they were always bought. And now the issue is it gets harder and harder with online technology, the dark web. Things have become more and more complicated, more and more hard to trace. So we are expecting, unless states around them take a complete onus and try fixing it, it's going to be harder, because the other side, if you can expect human trafficking has reached second or third levels of achieving illegal profits, you can see how hard it is to crack. It's not easy. So it's not just from India, but not just from one state, but we need a global priority on this issue, which can be done only when we, talk about other issues as well, right? So it's a complicated, it's a multi-dimensional issue, and a multifaceted response is only possible. And so convergence, what we can do as individuals is very important. What as stakeholders they can do, that's also important. And what is the decision makers, what they can do, that is also important. So it lies in the hands of all of us, in short.
Definitely. I mean, it definitely is a multifaceted. I think it's like a web of issues,
Yeah.
Tangled together. And unless one is tackled the other, we can't move forward to one.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So just two more questions and we'll be done. So we see number of rape cases increasing day by day. What do you think is the reason for? And most of the victims are women, and perpetrators are usually men. So what do you think? Is the reason for this kind of attitude, men's attitude toward women? And do you think technology has any role to play in this?
I mean, technology has a major role to play with it, but it's also the way we are functioning as individuals in society. There's a lot of nurturing that goes by, which is very important. Like a child, when that child is nurtured at home, the ideas that's brought into that person, the education that's given. So all of that. So in short, the society and the community in each community also actually influences an individual. So we are only breaking patriarchal norms, and we've just started to bring in a change. So it's going to be harder. The difference that we see with the rapes, increasing rapes, is not that rapes were not happening earlier. Also rapes were happening. The difference is women have started to report more. That is why we are seeing a reported number of cases that is higher, which I think is a good change. It's a good initiative, because that's how we can at least talk to an extent. We need to show the state that this is a huge problem, that this is happening everywhere, and we need changes, and we need hue and cry about it. We need educational systems that can talk about issues like this. This education about rights, about your fundamental rights, about teaching that person to respect each other, needs to start from the time when we started schools, and in colleges, because by the time we reach colleges, we are almost formed, right? We've almost have an identity, we do understand, we have our own notions. So those things can change only right from within our families. So I would say, ministries should take it up, talk about these situations, and not that these things are happening. Like rape is something that it's a very next level, but then obviously to talk about these issues. It all starts off with a sexual harassment most of the time. It doesn't jump into a rape in cases. Most of the time, what we've all seen is there's sexual harassment happening in many women, in most women. I could say 98% of us must have faced some sexual harassment or the other. And it's only very recently that we have all started opening up. So discuss about it. What are the ways in which we can help our society change from this culture of just forcing things on others? How we can bring up a discussion or a deliberative platform where we respect each other, we value each other's word, we do not talk in ways that can demean the other person, right? How do we also value each other's relationship? How do we see each other in a relationship? Do we see each other? Do we have to also uphold the rights of the other spouse? It's very important. These are things that needs to be talked about. And not just that, the domestic, most of the time domestic violence is the, and the way we call domestic violence only when that person gets slapped, that's when we all, stand up. But even oral behavior is very much important. How we talk to our spouse, it's very important, so that the other person's dignity is not lost. We can have
Yes.
debates, we can have arguments, there's nothing wrong in having arguments, but it should not offend the other person to that nature that that person feels there's so much trauma coming out from this situation. So those things needs to change. So I guess discussions, deliberations are very much important. And reporting crime just shows that women have become more stronger. Women will not leave it at it, which is again a good indication, I feel. But definitely there it has its own challenges when it comes to court. We have to fight our cases. The lawyers are, do meddle with the cases. All of that happens. But at the same time, I see it as a great way of just believing that, we will not give up this time. So we will not, just close our eyes and state that, okay, I will just live my life. No, I will stand up for my right. I would stand up for who I am. That's important.
Definitely. I think it all sums up to, mutual respect, communicating, and then, standing up for oneself. So that's all for today. I actually have so many other questions, but we're short on time. Hopefully, we could have another session with you sometime. So thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an amazing session. So thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate you and we applaud you for all the work you've been doing through these years. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So
I would like to thank the ministry, Mary Alpha, and all the others who are involved in arranging such an amazing session, because these are important sessions, and to just talk about it. So I would say this is a revolution that you've brought about, to just deliberate and discuss. I'm sure there'll be more sessions in place, but I'm also very much. This is one of my first platforms. Usually I take up more of the educational crowds or public awareness sessions. This is one of my first sessions where I'm connecting with a ministry, and I'm very happy that I was able to draw attention to some of the most important issues that's running across. And I'm so glad that church ministries have identified that this is an issue that needs to be talked about, deliberated upon, and also acted upon. So thank you so much.
yeah, thank you so much. I've just passed out from masters, and it did sound like I was hearing to a paper presentation, but it was a great time. So thank you so much once again, and we look forward to meeting you sometime soon. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and we could close the session with a word of prayer. Uh, Gracious Lord, thank you so much for the great time you've given us, Lord. Thank you so much for, Lord, the loads of information and new knowledge we could gather on the, Lord, the respective subject, Lord. Lord, help us to keep it in mind. Help us to, keep this in mind whenever we go out in our daily lives. And so when we come across situations as such, that we minister to those people, that we stand as examples, that we reach out to everyone, help them, and if we face it ourselves, Lord, that we would be able to stand up, that we have the courage to report everything, and Lord, work for a better society, which is in your image, Lord. So help us as individuals to transform ourselves, to transform the society, and bring about a new world that lives on your values. Thank you so much for this time once again. I come to the rest of the meetings with my loving hands. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.